You hypnotize.
This is the latest addition to Canon's mirrorless lineup. It's the Canon EOS R8. It's got the brains of the Canon R6 Mark II and a body that's, well, let's just say it's got some compromises. I've just spent several days testing the R8 and the R50 at Canon's media event in South Carolina, and I've come to really like this camera. The R8 is aimed at the advanced amateur or the beginning professional looking to get excellent image quality, great autofocus, and portability without breaking the bank. But the things it's missing, it might be a deal breaker for many of you potential customers. In this video, I'll talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of this camera, who it is really for, and what you need to know before you buy it. Is the Canon R8 right for you? Let's give it a try. This is Dave Tries This. I'm David Schloss, and if you like expert, honest gear reviews from an honest gear review expert, please hit the subscribe button below. When Canon first got into the mirrorless camera market, the biggest complaint was that there weren't enough models for most Canon users to move to the company's new RF mount. Now we're in an era where there's almost too much choice in the Canon lineup. Canon reps describe the R8 as a great option for the photographer moving up in the ranks, but it's also an excellent choice for professionals as a secondary camera, and for some, even as a first. At $1,500, it is a great value compared to the R6 Mark II, which costs $1,000 more. Let's start by looking at the features inherited from the R6 Mark II and from the Canon EOS R3, and then we'll move into some of the problems that I've got with this camera. The 24.2 megapixel full-frame CMOS sensor has dual-pixel AF2 and a Digic X processor, and the autofocus system has Canon's new AI Servo subject recognition technology, which comes from the R6 Mark II and the EOS R3. Since the same sensor is the one the R6 Mark II, you know that image quality and video quality are nearly identical, which makes it really easy to match footage between the two systems. This is one of the reasons why I like the R8. It makes a great B camera for video, or a backup camera for the wedding or event photographer that wants a second body but doesn't want to spend it on an R6 II. The R8 also inherits the R6 Mark II's ability to capture up to 40 frames per second in electronic shutter mode. There's no mechanical shutter in the R8, and this feels more like the way that cameras are heading in this era. The Nikon Z9, for example, is already electronic shutter only, and the lack of a full mechanical shutter on the R8 reduces size and complexity. The R8 has electronic front curtain, which is a hybrid mechanical electronic shutter that uses the electronic shutter for part of the frame and a mechanical shutter for the rest of it. The electronic front curtain allows the camera to still sync with strobes and to eliminate the flickering caused by LED lights, but in the R8 this mode only allows for 6 frames a second shooting. That's okay for most portrait work, but not so great for sports. Sport shooters working under LED lights will need to activate the anti-flicker settings in the R8. The R8 also features AI Servo autofocus. AI Servo is Canon's new AI-driven autofocus technology. It's designed to pick out subjects like humans, animals, birds, and vehicles, and to increase the accuracy when photographing these subjects. Technically, it's called EOS ITR-AFX, but that is a ridiculous name, and nobody is going to call it that. So let's stick with AI Servo. There's also an auto mode where the camera attempts to identify the type of subject based on evaluating the scene. That way it'll try and pick out a person or an animal or a bird or something from the background. This doesn't work quite as well as setting the subject mode for the subject detection, but I think that this is the direction that all autofocus systems are going to go with AI. What's the point of having AI detect autofocus if you still have to tell it what you're pointing the camera at? Canon's AI-based recognition is just slightly behind the new AI system in Sony's A7R5, or else this would be the most powerful autofocus system available. Right now, Sony only has that AI autofocus system on the one camera model, while Canon already has rolled out 4 cameras with it, the R3, R6 Mark II, R8, and the R50, and they all use the same AI detection system. As a result, the Canon R8 has the most powerful autofocus system at this price. The A7 IV, which is similarly priced, that is so hard to say, similarly priced, has an autofocus system that's a generation older than the R8. It has no AI-based recognition. The R8 also focuses better than the Nikon Z6, Z7, Z6 II, and the Z7 II, and none of those cameras have AI subject recognition, and neither does the Nikon Z9. In my test with the Canon R8, I was really pleased at how quickly it found and tracked subjects. The R8 was especially good at human eye detection. Canon already has autofocus that's great at finding and focusing on human eyes, but the system in the R8 is better by far than that in the R, the RP, the R5, and the R6. The EVF is good, although not the best on the market by far, and it's starting to look old. With only 2.36 million dots and 120 Hz refresh rate, I never thought that the image wasn't sharp enough to evaluate the scene, but I did wish that I had a higher res EVF. The 3-inch LCD screen on the back is touch and gesture capable like Canon's other models. Canon has a particularly good implementation of touch on their LCD screens, with virtually any control displayed on the screen accessible by touch. One of my favorite new features is the tap to select next subject feature. Here's an explanation of that from my R50 video. You can find a link to that video up above. I don't usually use any of the modes that allow you to do the touch-sensitive screen where you can drag the focus around. I'm left eye dominant, and so mostly my nose sticks up against the screen, and so I end up moving the focus all over. However, there's a new setting that I like a lot that lets you just tap the screen. If you tap the screen, it will jump to the next subject in a row. So let's say you have multiple people, 2 people, 3 people standing next to each other. You put the focus point over the first person, it finds their eye, and you decide you want their other eye. You tap it once, and it'll jump from one eye to the other eye, and then you decide that you want to get the next person, and you tap again, and it jumps over to their eye, tap again to their eye, their other eye, tap it again, it goes to the next person. So it basically cycles through all the things it recognizes in a scene. I like that a lot. The R8 lacks the joystick, which is to me one of the bigger problems with this camera. The joystick is so useful, I think it should be present on every camera system. That said, the combination of the AI Servo autofocus and the new ability to tap to cycle between subjects makes the R8 much more useful to me, still not as good as a joystick. On the video side, the R8 is equally as powerful. The camera can capture full-width 4K, 60p 10-bit footage at 422. At 4K 30, Canon says the camera will record for up to 2 hours. I didn't run tests that long, but I did record for more than 40 minutes of video without any overheating, so that 2 hours feels very doable with the R8. The R8 also has C-Log 3, which further ensures its ability to match footage with other Canon cameras, including the company's Cine camera lineup. Thankfully, Canon has equipped the R8 with a microphone and a headphone jack and HDMI, although the HDMI port is micro HDMI, not the full-size HDMI port you'd find on Sony cameras. The micro HDMI port is much more prone to disconnecting and breaking, and really any camera being used for regular video should have a full-size HDMI port. Before I talk about my specific shooting experience, let's talk a little bit about the limitations and the compromises in the Canon EOS R8. There are a few things on this camera, or I should say not on this camera, that just a few years ago would have resulted in mockery. In fact, Sony's cameras had some of these limitations in the early days of mirrorless, and they're features that people pointed at all the time when they said that mirrorless cameras would never be as good as DSLR cameras. Even bigger than the lacking joystick is the omission of in-body image stabilization. I just can't even on this one. In-body image stabilization is one of the most important advances in camera technology. No IBIS at a $900 price point? Sure. No IBIS at a $1,500 price point? That's a bit odd. Both the Sony a7 IV and the Nikon Z5, 2 price-level competitors to this camera, have in-body image stabilization. Image stabilization is only possible on the R8 with optically stabilized lenses, and while Canon does have some of these, you should not have to plan your purchase around image-stabilized lenses. This is made even more frustrating because Canon has been actively litigating against companies that are working on making RF mount lenses. There aren't a ton of entry-level RF mount lenses with image stabilization. You can't get them from Tamron and Sigma, and Canon's going to sue Tamron and Sigma just to make sure that you only can get their lenses. If they had more lenses, that might be great, but right now what you get is a system that requires a certain thing to get a basic functionality, but there isn't a lot of that thing, and you can't have it. Of course, you can splurge for the higher-end image-stabilized lenses, and Canon released a new kit lens with this, the 2450, which is a good lens, but it's not as good as the image quality coming from the R8, which makes it a bit of an odd pairing. I spent a lot of time shooting the R8 with the 24-105 and the 50mm 1.2 and the 135mm, and those produced some fantastic images. But without image stabilization of the portrait lenses, I had to be very careful about shutter speed, movement, and jiggling the camera while I was shooting it. So here's an example of the problem. This footage was shot with the Canon R50, but it shows the issue with lack of stabilization when shooting video. The next limitation is battery life. Canon opted to pair the R8 with the smaller batteries, the same found on the RP, whose body this shares, and the R50. I got way less than a day of shooting using the smaller battery, and if I owned the R8, I'd have to buy and carry several batteries with me just to complete a shoot. The third limitation is not problematic for some customers, but pros may have issues with this. There's only a single SD card slot. That means no backup video, no backup photos. In creativity, the R8 has picked up a new auto shooting mode that's got a new A+ selector on the dial. This auto mode is designed to apply some camera intelligence to selecting settings, but some of those features end up adding more complexity to the experience and not really providing much more functionality. I won't get too much into these tools in this video, but I covered them in the R50 review, and you can find the link to that review here. The R8 and the R50 creative tools are the same, and my rant over there in that video applies here too. The TLDR is that there are now around 5 different ways to apply some degree of creative settings, and these should really be set into one unified menu with one unified experience. Right now, you need to go to several different dial selections. You have to go through several different menus and several different ways to activate and deactivate those settings. It's bonkers. Despite all these limitations, the Canon R8 is a joy to use. I tested the R8 with the Kit 2450, the 51.2, the 135L, and the images were excellent, as I would have expected for a camera with the same sensor as the R6 Mark II. The body is comfortable and easy to use. In my mind, Canon's ergonomics are the best in the market right now. The grip and the body are sculpted and curved right where they should be, buttons are in the right place, and the camera fits well in my hand. The only way I could really tell that I wasn't shooting the R6 Mark II is that there wasn't a joystick there, and I'd get surprised when my thumb would go to try and move the joystick. So if you're a fan of Canon's body and menu designs, you're going to be able to pick up the R8 and just start using it instantly. The camera is obviously aimed at a first-time photographer looking to up their game from an entry-level camera or smartphone, but I think it's also great for a number of pro users as well. For a portrait photographer, using the camera with no IBIS isn't a huge deal, and there are a number of great portrait lenses to choose from. Since the sensor is the same as the R6 Mark II, portrait shooters end up with an R8 and a lens for the price of the R6 Mark II. But I also think that this camera is perfect for many other types of pros. Wedding photographers starting out will love the R8, established shooters can buy the R8 as an affordable backup camera, or maybe a camera for a second shooter. For video, the R8 is a no-brainer if it's not used handheld. In fact, for gimbal users, the camera is perfect. You can couple the R8 with a gimbal like the new light DJI RS3. It's a great package for mobile use, and the R8 would work on it perfectly. The $1,000 price difference over the R6 Mark II makes this a very compelling studio camera, especially considering how good the eye detect autofocus is in the system. For sports photographers, this is a really interesting camera. You've got the same 40 frames a second as the R6 Mark II, which is faster than the R3, but you have no IBIS. As a longtime sports photographer, I would probably just pair this with an image-stabilized piece of glass or put it on a tripod. This is a great camera to have in your bag for if your other cameras break. My experience shooting with the R8 was very similar to my experience shooting with the R6 Mark II. The R8 is a great choice for the photographer looking for a high-powered camera without all of the bells and whistles. It's the best full-frame Canon you can get without paying significantly more for the experience. So what do you think? If you're in the market for the R8, do the positives outweigh the negatives? Are you going to pull the trigger and get one? Or do you need something with more features? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, over here you can find my review of the Canon R50, which has my little rant about the creative features. Over here you can subscribe to the channel, and please do. And down here you can buy some sweet, sweet merch. For Dave Tries This, I'm David Schloss. Thanks for watching, and thanks for giving this a try.